The massive ship appeared above Earth on a Tuesday morning, and nothing would ever be the same again. Commander Kethral of the Volante Dominion stood at the observation deck of his flagship, looking down at the blue and green planet below him with a mixture of boredom and mild curiosity, wondering how long this conquest would take. What do we know about these creatures? He asked his science officer, a tall being with silver skin and 4 eyes that blinked in sequence. They call themselves humans. Commander, the officer replied while scrolling through data on a floating screen. They are carbon-based life forms with soft skin and no natural armor, no claws, no venom, and no telepathic abilities whatsoever. Kethral made a sound that was the Volante equivalent of a laugh, a clicking noise deep in his throat that echoed through the command deck. Another easy victory then, he said with absolute confidence. How many worlds have we conquered now? 117, Commander. And how many of those species had natural weapons? All of them, Commander. Yet they all fell before the Dominion. Kethral turned back to the window and watched the clouds swirl over the planet's surface, thinking about how quickly this would be over and how he could return to more interesting duties elsewhere in the galaxy. The Volante had been conquering worlds for over 10,000 years, and they had developed a perfect system for it. They would arrive, demonstrate their overwhelming power, and give the native species a simple choice between submission and extinction. And every single species had chosen submission because that was the logical thing to do within hours. The Volante established contact with Earth governments and demanded a meeting with their leaders. And they were somewhat surprised when the humans agreed without much argument. The summit took place aboard Kethral's ship in a large conference room, designed to intimidate lesser species. The walls were decorated with trophies from conquered worlds, and holographic displays showed the Volante fleet in all its terrifying glory. General Tanquo led the human delegation, and Kethral studied her carefully as she entered the room. She was a tall woman with dark skin and gray hair cut short, and she walked with the confidence of someone who had seen many battles. Behind her came several other humans, and behind them came something that made Kethral's 4 eyes narrow in confusion. It was a large furry creature with 4 legs and a long snout, and it walked beside one of the human soldiers as if it belonged there. Its tongue hung out of its mouth and its tail wagged back and forth as it looked around the room. "What is that thing?" Kethral demanded, pointing at the creature. General Okonkwo glanced down and smiled slightly before answering. "That is a German shepherd, Commander. His name is Rex, and he is Sergeant Morrison's partner." "Partner?" Kethral repeated the word as if it tasted strange in his mouth. "You form partnerships with non-sapient animals?" "We do," Okonkwo said simply, taking her seat at the conference table without waiting to be invited. "We have done so for thousands of years." Kethral dismissed this information as unimportant and began his standard speech, the same one he had given to over 100 species before. He explained the power of the Volante Dominion, the size of their fleet, the superiority of their weapons, and the futility of resistance. The humans listened quietly, their faces showing little emotion. And Kethral found this slightly annoying because most species showed fear at this point. "You have 1 lunar cycle to surrender your planet and accept Volante rule," he concluded. "If you refuse, we will destroy your cities and enslave your population. And there is nothing you can do to stop us." He waited for the begging to begin, for the desperate pleas for mercy that always came at this moment. But General Okonkwo simply looked at him with calm eyes. "No," she said. The single word hung in the air, and Kethral felt a strange sensation that he could not identify. No species had ever said no before. "I do not think you understand your situation," he said slowly. "We have weapons that can turn your cities to glass in seconds. We have soldiers bred for war for 10,000 years. And we have conquered species far more powerful than yours. I understand perfectly, Okonkwo replied. And my answer is still no. The dog called Rex had moved closer to his handler during this exchange, and now he let out a low growl in Kethral's direction. It was such a small sound, but something about it made Kethral uncomfortable in a way he could not explain. You are making a terrible mistake, he warned. Perhaps, Okonkwo said as she stood up and prepared to leave. But I do not think so, Commander. I think you are the one making a mistake. And what mistake is that? The general smiled then, and it was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone who knew something that others did not. You scanned our planet, and you found humans, she said. You decided we were weak because we have no claws or fangs or telepathy. But you failed to notice something very important. And what is that? You failed to notice that we are not alone on this world. She gestured toward Rex, who was still growling softly. You see pets and decorations, but you do not understand what you are looking at. Enlighten me then. General Okonkwo walked toward the door, her delegation following behind her, and she paused at the threshold to look back at Kethral one final time. You have not met our family yet. Commander, she said quietly, when you invade our world, you will understand what that means, and by then, it will be too late for you. She left without another word. And Kethral stood alone in his conference room, feeling something he had not felt in centuries. It took him a long moment to identify the emotion, because it was so unfamiliar. It was doubt. He shook it off quickly, because he was a commander of the Volanti Dominion, and he had conquered over 100 worlds. And these soft creatures with their furry companions could not possibly pose a threat to his forces. Gave the order to prepare for invasion and pushed the strange conversation out of his mind. But somewhere deep inside him, a small voice whispered that he had missed something important in the weeks that followed. As his forces prepared for the assault on Earth, Kethral would sometimes wake from sleep with the sound of that dog's growl echoing in his mind. And he would wonder what the human general had meant when she spoke of family he would learn soon enough, and the lesson would cost him everything. The invasion began exactly one lunar cycle after the failed summit. Just as Commander Kethral had promised, massive warships descended through Earth's atmosphere like metal gods coming down from the heavens, and their plasma cannons lit up the sky with terrible beauty as they targeted military bases around the world. New York fell first, then London, then Tokyo, then Moscow, and within the first 3 hours of the invasion, humanity's major military installations were nothing but smoking craters. Kethral watched the destruction from his command ship with satisfaction, thinking that this was going exactly as he had expected. The humans had been foolish to refuse his offer, and now they would pay the price for their arrogance. Deploy the ground forces, he ordered. Begin occupation of the major population centers. The Sheth were the Volanti's perfect soldiers. Insectoid warriors standing 8 feet tall with armored exoskeletons and razor-sharp claws. They had been bred for war over thousands of generations, and they shared a telepathic hive mind that allowed them to coordinate their movements with perfect precision. Millions of them poured out of landing craft and marched into human cities, expecting the civilians to flee in terror as they always did on every conquered world. But something strange happened on Earth. The humans did not run in the streets of Chicago. A group of human soldiers took cover behind burned-out cars and opened fire on an advancing Sheth column. They were outnumbered 10 to 1, and their weapons barely scratched the Sheth armor. But they kept fighting anyway. One soldier took a plasma blast to his chest that should have killed him instantly. But somehow he stayed on his feet long enough to throw a grenade into the middle of the Sheth formation before he finally collapsed in Berlin. An old man with a hunting rifle shot a Sheth officer through the gap in its helmet. And when the other Sheth warriors turned to kill him, he just smiled and detonated the explosives he had strapped to his chest in Mumbai. A teenage girl led a group of civilians through the sewers to escape a chef patrol. And when they were discovered, she stayed behind to hold off the enemy while the others escaped. She killed 3 of them with nothing but a kitchen knife before they finally brought her down. Catherall received reports of these incidents and found them deeply confusing. Every other species they had conquered had surrendered once they realized resistance was hopeless. But these humans seemed incapable of accepting defeat. Why do they keep fighting? He asked his advisors. Can they not see that they have already lost? Unknown, Commander, one advisor replied. Their behavior does not match any predictive models we have developed. They are illogical creatures, another advisor suggested. Perhaps their brains are simply not advanced enough to recognize a hopeless situation. Catherall accepted this explanation because it made sense to him, and he ordered his forces to increase the pressure. Surely humans would break eventually if enough of them died. But days passed and then weeks. And still the humans refused to surrender. They fought in the streets and in the buildings and in the forests and in the mountains. They set traps and ambushes and launched suicide attacks that cost the chef thousands of soldiers. They turned every city block into a fortress and every village into a death trap. Thrall had never lost so many soldiers in a single campaign, and it was starting to affect morale among his forces. Commander, we have taken 30% casualties in the North American sector alone, his tactical officer reported one evening. At this rate, we will need reinforcements within the month. Impossible, Catherall snapped. These creatures have no claws, no armor, no telepathy. How can they be inflicting such losses on the chef? They fight with complete disregard for their own survival, Commander, the officer explained. Our soldiers expect enemies to retreat when injured or outnumbered, but the humans do neither. They just keep attacking until they are dead. Catherall brooded on this information for a long time, trying to understand what drove these strange creatures to fight so desperately. They had to know they could not win. They had to see that the Volanti were stronger. So why did they not simply accept their fate? He decided to broadcast a message to Earth, hoping that perhaps reason would succeed where force had failed. People of Earth, he said, his image appearing on every screen and device on the planet. Your resistance is impressive, but ultimately meaningless. You cannot defeat us. You cannot stop us. You can only delay the inevitable and cause yourselves more suffering. Surrender now, and we will be merciful. Continue to fight, and we will show you no mercy at all. He expected the message to break their spirit, but the response he received was not what he anticipated. General Okonkwo appeared on his screen, looking older and more tired than she had at their first meeting, but still showing that same strange confidence in her eyes. Thank you for your offer, Commander, she said calmly, but I am afraid we must decline once again. You are throwing away the lives of your people for nothing. Catherall shouted, losing his composure for the first time. We are fighting for everything, Okonkwo corrected him. For our homes, for our families, for our world, and we will never stop fighting, not until the last human draws their last breath. Then you will all die. Perhaps, she said, and that mysterious smile appeared on her face again. But Commander, I told you before that you had not met our whole family, and that is still true. What are you talking about? You have been fighting humans for weeks now, and you have seen how fierce we can be. The general leaned closer to the camera. But we have been holding back, Commander. We have been protecting our most powerful allies, waiting for the right moment to unleash them. Catherall felt a chill run down his spine despite himself, remembering the doubt he had felt after their first meeting. You are bluffing, he said, though his voice lacked conviction. In exactly 12 hours, you will learn the truth, Okonkwo said. I suggest you tell your soldiers to be afraid, because what is coming for them is beyond anything they have ever faced. The transmission ended. And Catherall sat in silence for a long moment, deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, in a facility that had been built in secret decades ago. General Okonkwo stood before a massive steel door and entered the authorization code for protocol Fenris around the world. Similar facilities began to open, their contents stirring after months of waiting. They wanted to know what makes humanity strong. Okonkwo said to her aide as warning lights began to flash. They thought it was our weapons or our technology or our intelligence. She stepped back as the door began to rise, and from the darkness beyond came the sound of growling, barking, howling, and other sounds that were far more terrifying. They were wrong, she said quietly. Our strength has always been the bonds we share. And now our family is going to war. The door opened fully, and the beasts of Earth were finally unleashed. The days following General Okonkwo's warning were strangely quiet, and this made Commander Catherall nervous in a way he could not explain. Human resistance had not stopped completely, but it had changed somehow. The desperate attacks and suicide missions had decreased, and instead the humans seemed to be pulling back, retreating into the wilderness areas that the Volanthi had not yet bothered to occupy. They are finally breaking, his tactical officer suggested during the morning briefing. Perhaps your message convinced them that further resistance is useless. Perhaps, Catherall replied, but he did not believe it. There had been something in General Okonkwo's eyes during their last communication, something that looked nothing like defeat. He ordered increased patrols in the forested regions and waited for reports. But what came back confused him even more. Commander, we have lost contact with Patrol Unit 7 in the northern forest sector. A communication officer reported ambush. Catherall asked. Unknown, Commander. Their last transmission was cut off mid-sentence. And when we sent a rescue team to investigate, they found nothing but scattered equipment and strange marks on the trees. What kind of marks? Claw marks, Commander. Very large ones. Catherall pulled up the images on his display and studied them carefully. The gouges in the tree bark were deep and savage, made by something with incredible strength. Could the humans have some kind of weapon we do not know about? He wondered aloud. Our scans showed no evidence of such technology, his science officer replied. But these marks were definitely not made by human hands. Similar reports began coming in from all over the planet. Patrols would enter forested areas and simply disappear, leaving behind nothing but scattered equipment and no same mysterious claw marks. Firebase Theta 9 was a forward operating base in what the humans called Siberia, a cold and empty region that the Volanthi had chosen because it seemed like a safe location far from human population centers. On the night of the 7th day, after Okonkwo's warning, all communication with Theta 9 went dark. Get them back online, Catherall ordered, his voice tight with growing concern. We are trying, Commander, but there is no response on any frequency. Send a reinforcement battalion immediately. The battalion arrived at Firebase Theta 9 3 hours later, and what they found would become a legend that spread terror through the entire Volanthi military. Every single soldier in the base was dead, but they had not been killed by human weapons. There were no plasma burns or bullet holes, no signs of explosives or combat. Instead, the bodies showed wounds that made the hardened Volanthi soldiers feel physically ill. They had been torn apart, massive bite marks covered the corpses, and great gashes had been ripped through their armored exoskeletons by claws of incredible size and power. Some bodies had been dragged across the ground, leaving trails of green blood in the snow, while others looked like they had been shaken apart by something unimaginably strong. What could have done this? The battalion commander whispered. Unable to look away from the carnage, one of his soldiers found a partial recording from the base's security system, and they watched it in horrified silence. The video showed the Sheth soldiers on routine duty, completely unaware of any danger, and then suddenly enormous shapes burst from the darkness around the base. They moved so fast that the camera could barely capture them. But the soldiers could make out fur and teeth and eyes that glowed in the night. The Sheth tried to fight back, firing their weapons wildly into the darkness. But the creatures were too fast and too strong. Within minutes, it was over, and the shapes disappeared back into the forest as quickly as they had come. The battalion commander sent the recording directly to Commander Kethral, who watched it 17 times trying to understand what he was seeing. "What are those things?" he demanded. "Unknown, Commander. Our database has no record of such creatures on Earth." "The humans," Kethral said slowly. Remembering Okonkwo's words, she said they had been holding something back. She said they had allies we had not seen. For the first time since the invasion began, real fear started to spread through the Volanthi occupation force. Soldiers who had conquered 100 worlds without hesitation began to look over their shoulders and jump at shadows. The attacks continued every night, always in the dark, always in isolated locations. Patrols would be found torn to pieces, supply convoys would vanish without a trace, and the screams of dying Sheth would echo through the forest before being suddenly cut short. The human prisoners in the occupation camps noticed a change in their captors. The Sheth guards who had once been so confident and cruel now seemed nervous and distracted, constantly watching the tree lines with weapons ready, and the humans began to smile. They smiled and whispered to each other. And sometimes they would whisper to the Sheth guards as well, saying the same phrase over and over again. "The pack is coming." "What does that mean?" a Sheth officer demanded of a human prisoner, grabbing him by the throat and lifting him off the ground. "A pack. What is coming?" The human just kept smiling, even as the officer's claws dug into his neck. And when he spoke, his voice was calm and certain. "You will find out soon enough," he said. "And when you do, you will wish you had never come to our world." The officer threw him to the ground in frustration. But the human smile never wavered. Commander Kethral stood at his window that night, looking down at the dark forests of Earth and feeling something his species had bred out of themselves 10,000 years ago. He was afraid not of the humans themselves, who were still outnumbered and outgunned, but of whatever was hiding in those shadows. Whatever had torn his soldiers apart with such savage efficiency. "General Okonkwo," he whispered to himself, "what have you unleashed?" As if in answer, a howl rose from the forest below, long and haunting and hungry, and it was joined by another howl and then another until the night was filled with the sound. Beasts of Earth were calling to each other, gathering in the darkness, preparing for the war that was about to begin. And deep in those same forests, General Okonkwo stood among her true soldiers and ran her fingers through the fur of a massive wolf that stood at her side. "Tomorrow," she told him softly, "tomorrow we show them what it really means to fight Earth." The wolf's golden eyes gleamed in the moonlight, and all around them thousands of other eyes gleamed as well, waiting for the signal to attack. The calm was ending. The storm was about to break. Dawn broke over Earth, and with it came the end of the Volanthi dream of conquest. It started in every forest, every jungle, every wild place on the planet at exactly the same moment, as if some silent signal had been given that only Earth's creatures could hear. In the forests of North America, packs of wolves burst from the tree lines and fell upon Volanthi patrols with terrifying ferocity. These were not ordinary wolves, but something far more dangerous. The result of decades of secret military breeding programs designed to create the ultimate canine warriors. They were larger than any wolf that had existed before, with muscles like steel cables and jaws that could crush Sheth armor like paper. They moved with perfect coordination, surrounding their enemies and attacking from all sides at once. Sheth tried to use their telepathic hive mind to coordinate their defense, but the wolves were too fast and too unpredictable. They struck and vanished and struck again, never giving the aliens a moment to organize in the skies above Europe. Falcons and eagles wearing strange devices on their heads dove at Volanti aircraft with suicidal bravery. The devices released electromagnetic pulses that scrambled the alien targeting systems. And without their advanced weapons, the aircraft were helpless against the human missiles that followed. The birds would sometimes die in these attacks, crashing into the alien ships at full speed, but they never hesitated. Driven by their bond with the human handlers who had raised them from eggs in Africa, the elephants came. They were massive creatures, the largest land animals on Earth, and humans had armored them with plates of steel and carbon fiber that turned their bodies into living tanks. They charged through Volanti defensive lines like mountains come to life, crushing everything in their path. Sheth soldiers fired plasma weapons at them, but the armor held, and then the elephants were among them, trampling and throwing and destroying with a fury that was almost supernatural. Beside, the elephants ran the lions and the leopards and the hyenas, predators that had learned to fight alongside humans instead of against them, tearing into the alien soldiers with teeth and claws, while the elephants created chaos in the oceans. The dolphins and orcas guided human submarines through underwater minefields, using their natural sonar to detect threats that human technology could not find. They helped sink 3 Volanti warships before the aliens even realized they were under attack, but it was the dogs that truly broke the back of the invasion. They came in the millions, every breed that humanity had ever created, and they came with their human partners at their side. German shepherds charged into plasma fire without a moment of fear, leaping at Sheth soldiers and dragging them to the ground where human soldiers could finish them off. Belgian Malinois moved so fast that the aliens could not track them, appearing and disappearing like furry ghosts. Mastiffs the size of small horses crashed through alien lines, their massive jaws closing around limbs and weapons with crushing force. Pit bulls fought with a tenacity that astounded even the bravest Sheth warriors, refusing to let go even when injured, and everywhere the dogs went, their humans went with them, fighting as one unit, understanding each other without words, moving together as if they shared a single mind. Commander Kethril watched the battle reports with growing horror, unable to understand what he was seeing. How is this possible? He shouted at his advisors. How do these animals know what the humans want? How do they coordinate without telepathy? We do not know, Commander, a terrified science officer admitted. Our models cannot explain this behavior on the ground. A young human soldier named Maria fought alongside her partner, a 5-year-old Belgian Malinois named Storm. They had been together since Storm was a puppy, training every day, learning to read each other's smallest movements. When Maria moved left, Storm moved right. When Maria took cover, Storm attacked. When Storm found an enemy, Maria was already aiming her weapon. They did not need telepathy because they had something better. They had years of love and trust and shared experience, a bond that had been forged through countless hours of playing and training and simply being together. A Sheth officer cornered Maria in a destroyed building, his plasma rifle aimed at her chest, and he thought he had won. Then Storm came through a broken window like a missile, hitting the alien in the back and sinking his teeth into the gap between the armor plates on its neck. The Sheth screamed and tried to shake him off, but Storm held on with everything he had. Maria shot the alien through the head and then gathered Storm in her arms, checking him for injuries. "Good boy," she whispered. And Storm's tail wagged even as the battle raged around them. Scenes like this played out across the entire planet. Humans and animals fighting together against an enemy that could not understand their bond. A captured Sheth soldier was brought before General Okonkwo late in the day, and she studied him with something like pity in her eyes. "Why do your creatures fight for you?" the Sheth demanded, struggling against his bonds. "They are not sapient. They cannot understand concepts like war or duty or loyalty. So why do they die for you?" Okonkwo smiled and gestured to the old German shepherd lying at her feet. The same one called Rex, who had been at the first meeting with Kethril. "You see animals," she said. "You see primitive creatures driven by instinct and nothing more. But you are wrong." She knelt down and scratched Rex behind his ears. And the old dog's tail thumped against the floor. "They fight for us because they love us," she said simply. "And we fight for them because we love them. That is something your species forgot long ago when you evolved beyond your connection to your own world. Love is not a weapon." The chef spat. "You are wrong about that too," Okonkwo replied. "Love is the most powerful weapon in the universe. And you have just learned that lesson the hard way." By sunset, the tide of the war had turned completely. Volanthi forces were in full retreat across the globe, harried at every step by humans and animals working. Together, Commander Kethril looked at the casualty reports and felt something he had never felt before in his entire military career. He felt defeated, and he knew that the worst was yet to come. The final battle for Earth lasted 3 more weeks, but the outcome was never in doubt after that first day of the animal. Offensive Commander Kethril tried everything he could think of to turn the tide. He ordered his ships to bombard the forests from orbit, hoping to kill the creatures hiding there. But the animals simply moved to new locations faster than the Volanthi could track them. He tried using chemical weapons designed to target specific Earth species. But the humans had anticipated this and developed countermeasures decades ago. The chemicals dispersed harmlessly in the air while the animals continued their relentless attacks. He even tried negotiating a surrender, offering to leave Earth in exchange for safe passage out of the solar system. But General Okonkwo refused. "You came here to conquer or destroy us," she told him via communication screen. "You do not get to simply leave after what you have done. What do you want then?" Kethril demanded, desperation clear in his voice. "Justice," Okonkwo replied. "And we will have it." The counteroffensive pushed the Volanthi back from every continent, liberating camps and cities and reclaiming the planet piece by piece. Human soldiers marched alongside their animal companions, a sight that would have seemed impossible just months ago. Cavalry units on horseback charged through enemy lines, the riders and horses moving as one being. Their attacks, perfectly coordinated war dogs, led assault teams through enemy fortifications, finding hidden soldiers and traps before their human partners walked into danger. Hawks circled overhead, their enhanced vision spotting enemy positions and somehow communicating this information to the humans below it. Was a way of warfare that the Volanthi had never seen before. A perfect fusion of technology and nature, of human intelligence and animal instinct. The final assault on Kethril's command ship was led by General Okonkwo herself. And she brought her oldest friend with her. Achilles was a German shepherd who had served with Okonkwo for over 12 years, since he was a young dog and she was a junior officer. He was old now, his muzzle gray, and his movements slower than they once were. But his eyes were still sharp, and his loyalty was still absolute. They rode a dropship into the belly of the Volanthi flagship, accompanied by the best soldiers Earth had to offer, both human and animal. The fighting in the corridors was fierce but brief. The Sheth defenders fought with the desperation of creatures who knew they were beaten, but they could not stop the combined assault dogs brought down soldiers while humans fired over them. A massive mastiff named Titan broke through a barricaded door while his partner threw grenades through the opening. A pair of border collies herded a group of fleeing Volanthi officers directly into a human ambush within an hour. It was over. Kethril stood alone on his command deck, surrounded by human soldiers and their animal companions. And he knew that his conquest of Earth had ended in complete failure. General Okonkwo stepped forward, Achilles limping faithfully at her side. And she looked at the alien who had threatened to destroy her world. "You are beaten," she said simply. "Your fleet is destroyed, your soldiers are dead or captured, and your dominion will never threaten Earth again." "How?" Kethril asked, the question he had been asking himself since the animals first attacked. How did you create such bonds with these creatures? They cannot speak your language. They cannot understand your plans. They cannot reason the way sapient beings do. So how? Okonkwo was quiet for a long moment. And when she spoke, her voice was soft. 10,000 years ago, when humanity was young and weak, we looked at the world around us, and we saw potential allies everywhere, she said. We could have dominated the other creatures of our world, used them and discarded them as you have done. But instead we chose a different path. She knelt down and put her arm around Achilles, who leaned against her with complete trust. We chose partnership, she continued. We invited the wolves to share our fires, and over generations they became dogs. We rode horses across continents and formed bonds of respect with them. We worked with hawks and falcons and elephants and dolphins, learning from them and teaching them in return. But why? Kethral asked, genuinely confused. What benefit could you gain from such arrangements? These creatures cannot build ships or develop technology or contribute to your civilization in any meaningful way. Okonkwo smiled then, the same mysterious smile she had shown him at their first meeting. They taught us something more important than technology, she said. They taught us loyalty and love and the strength that comes from standing together, and that is why you lost. Commander, she stood up and faced him directly. You evolved beyond your connection to your own world, she said. You became pure minds, cold and calculating and alone, and you forgot what it means to be part of something larger than yourself. But we never forgot. You could have told me this at the beginning, Kethral said bitterly. You could have warned me what I was facing. I did warn you, Okonkwo replied. I told you that you had not met our family yet, but you did not listen because you could not imagine that simple creatures could pose a threat to your advanced civilization. She gestured at the soldiers and animals around her, the dogs and their handlers, the hawks and their trainers, the bonds of love and loyalty visible in every interaction. This is our family, she said. Every creature that walks or swims or flies on Earth is part of our pack. And when you threaten the pack, we all fought back together. Kethral bowed his head in defeat, finally understanding the truth that had been in front of him since the beginning. What happens now? He asked. Now you return to your dominion and you tell them what happened here, Okonkwo said. You tell them about the planet called Earth, where humans and their animals stand together against any threat. And you tell them never to come back. She turned and walked away, Achilles padding slowly beside her. And at the door, she paused to look back one final time. And Commander? She added, if any other species out there is thinking of conquering Earth, tell them one more thing. What is that? Tell them that we are never alone, Okonkwo said. Tell them that when they fight one human, they fight every creature that human has ever loved. And tell them that the pack protects its own. She left. And Kethral was alone with his failure and his newfound understanding. The war was over Earth, had won and across the galaxy. The story of humanity and their beasts would be told for generations. A warning to any who might think of threatening the strange planet, where love had become the most powerful weapon of all on Earth. Children still played with their dogs in parks. Farmers still rode horses through fields. And humanity moved among its animals as it always had. Not as masters, but as family, the pack had protected its own. And the pack would always protect its own, forever.